You're listening to the Free to Be Mindful podcast, which provides bite-sized tips for busy parents, educators, and anyone working with kids. These real talk conversations focus on mindful living, mental health, and personal growth, helping all to learn, grow, and inspire with mindfulness in mind. I'm your host, Vanessa de Jesus Guzman, educator, licensed professional counselor, entrepreneur, and mom. I'm passionate about helping folks live life with peace of mind and ease of heart while not losing their, well, you know, here we go. Hello and welcome back to the Free to Be Mindful podcast. I hope that you're feeling good, looking good, and doing better in this world than you were yesterday. So I'm so excited for today's episode because as a guest, I have a friend by the name of Anyelis Cordero, who is a first-gen Latina HR consultant, coach, and speaker. She's a founder of Propel on Purpose Coaching, whose mission is to create equity by empowering first-gens to grow, lead, and build generational wealth while cultivating high-performing teams and inclusive cultures. She's going to share how she started doing that and now is pivoting to a brand new area that I'm so excited for her because it's just going to help so many more people in the realm of small businesses and then individually. Anyelis uses a holistic coaching approach that incorporates not only HR insights, but it also leans into emotional intelligence and cognitive behavioral methods that incorporate somatic practices. And that is where what she does intersects with the concept of mindfulness. It is important to note that Anyelis has a decade of corporate human resource experience with specialization in diversity and inclusion, leadership development, talent acquisition, and management. I hope that you get so much from this conversation because she is just phenomenal, has so much to offer. And whether you are listening to this and are in the workforce, you're looking to make a shift, if you're a first-gen person, you can be in so many different bubbles and pockets of life. And I know that you're going to get so much from this podcast episode. So without further ado, here we go. Well, hello, Anyelis. I am so excited that you have joined us on today's episode of the Free to Be Mindful podcast. Very, very excited that you're here. And I can't wait for the listeners to hear all the gems that you're going to drop about your journey and everything that you're doing. So welcome.
Yay! Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation and to be a guest. I love you and your brand and everything that you do and all the ways in which you make an impact. So really, it's an honor for me to be here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we just heard a little bit of your bio, but I'd love for you to take up space and just share a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are now.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'll start by saying I'm Anyelis Cordero. I'm an HR consultant, leadership coach, and speaker. And it has been a journey to get here. I am an immigrant. I was born in Cuba. I came to this country when I was 4 years old with my mom. We had no family, no resources, and by the grace of God and some really generous families and nonprofit organizations, we made it to Union City, New Jersey, where I grew up. At the time, it was predominantly Cuban, so that was really helpful for my mom to get acclimated. I grew up in Union City, went to Woodrow Wilson, the school for the quote-unquote gifted and talented. Then I went to the public high school, and it was at the time when they were, really doubling down on the importance of higher education. And so I was a nerdy kid. I was in all honors and AP classes. So I just knew that I had to go to college. I wasn't sure that I understood at the time what that meant after the fact, but I was a student, a nerdy student at that. And so I knew I had to go to college. I ended up going to Drew University here in Madison, New Jersey. It is a small private liberal arts college, predominantly white institution. And I didn't know what any of that meant. I literally picked that college because they had a UN semester, so a semester where you could do an internship at the UN. And I was really interested in government and politics at the time. I did Model UN in high school. And I loved the campus. I fell in love when I stepped foot on campus, and I'm so glad that I did. I went to Drew as an EOF student. I spent the first couple of weeks in that summer program before starting on campus. And then I quickly realized once everybody else got on campus that I was a minority, which
Mm.
I never knew before because I grew up in a predominantly Latino Hispanic community where everybody spoke Spanish and ate the same food.
Yep.
Uh, my best friends are Dominicans and Puerto Ricans and Ecuadorians, etc. And at Drew, it was the first time where I really felt othered. Like, who is this little biracial chick from who knows from where? Because she's got this cute accent. And I was like, what accent? A Jersey accent? I don't understand.
That's so funny because I used to get the same thing. Like, you have an accent. And I'm like, well, what kind of accent? Like an inner city accent. I'm like, what does that sound like? But we're from
Right.
around the same area. And I don't hear it in you. I'm sure you don't hear it in me, but I think other people do hear it,
Mm-hmm.
which is really
Yep.
funny. Before you go on with your journey, I do want to share. I actually looked at Drew University when I was looking at campuses, and I ended up going to the College of New Jersey, which has a similar feel as Drew,
Mm-hmm.
but I felt like Drew had like way too many trees for me. And growing up in an inner city, I was like, oh, too many trees, too many trees. I can't do it. But it's such a gorgeous campus. And I too
Yes.
was an EOF student, and we're both first generation. And I
Mm-hmm.
know we recently talked about this, but I'd love for you again to answer the question of what exactly is a first generation student, because so many people ask that question. Does it have to be somebody who was born in a different country, or can it be somebody who was born here?
Yes. So both. I think by definition, first generation college student is when you are the first in your family in this country to earn a higher education degree. So even if your parents went to school in another country and they have a higher education degree, it's a very different process here in the United States. And many of our parents who didn't have the language, my mom didn't, that meant that I had to figure all of that out from FAFSA applications to college essays, all of that. You're navigating that on your own as the first to do so. And then as a first generation college student, you're navigating college without that blueprint. And I started there. So this is like a very long way of answering your first question, but I start there because that was such a critical defining moment in my life that made me realize so many things. So at the time when I was learning, I ended up not going into government and politics. I ended up majoring in behavioral sciences, sociology, anthropology, and psychology because I was really interested in just human behavior and why we do the things that we do in different contexts, right? And when I was learning about race and ethnicity and systems and inequities, I was also experiencing that as someone who was a minority in a predominantly white institution, white and very wealthy. So
Hmm.
not only was it the first time that someone, mistook me for someone else because we were both so ethnic looking. What? They literally said that to me. I was like, I don't even know what that means. So it was the first time I was experiencing that from that like racial ethnicity perspective, but also very acutely aware of like, oh, I also didn't grow up with a lot of resources.
Hmm.
And that was normal because everybody that I grew up with, we're this is a working class community, right?
Right.
And so all of those experiences shaped me and shaped my career. After I graduated from college, I ended up working in the nonprofit sector. I managed the Hispanic Women's Resource Center for La Casa de Don Pedro, a community-based nonprofit organization in Newark. I was helping women who were professionals in their countries, but came here. They had the language barrier, helping them get acclimated, doing things like, workshops related to their resume, how to validate their degrees, how to find jobs. So personal and professional development has always been the through
Same.
line in my career. I just didn't know it when I was going through it. You know what I mean? I was like,
Yep.
I don't know what to do. So I'm doing this thing because it feels really good and I love helping people. And I quickly realized nonprofit wasn't it for me because although I graduated as a first gen and I started making $40,000 and that felt like so much money, back in the day, I quickly realized I had all these student loans to pay back and that wasn't going to cut it, not for the ambitious life that I wanted. And so it took me some time and there were some pain points in that journey. I actually went and did a master's program, a very small stint at the New School, thinking I was going to be a professor. That didn't work out. I withdrew. I was very confused because I didn't have this guidance and I didn't have those mentors. Again, because no one in my family or even in my extended network, many of my friends were either in education or in more traditional paths like lawyer and, accountant,
Right.
etc. And so after 4 years in that organization, it was the peak of the financial crisis. They lost their funding. I knew that I was going to be out of a job. And so it put the fire that I needed to really figure it out. And that's when I decided to go back to school and pursue a master's in HR management, because even though I wasn't in an HR role, it felt like I did a lot of HR related tasks, and I was in this intermediary role, which meant, most HR professionals you're always considering the business and the employees, right? So I did a 1-year master's program at the College of St. Elizabeth up the block from Drew because it was familiar, and I had a friend that went through the program. And then I graduated in that year. I literally just went with the first job that was offered to me
With a
because
job.
it was a job and I had been unemployed for a year going to school. So I said, I'll just figure it out. And I ended up working in a financial services company. And I didn't know the first thing about financial services. We just, we knew about traditional finance and banks, but not a wealth management. What does that even mean? I don't have money like that, right? And so I tried a number of different HR roles, trying to figure out what it was that I really wanted to do. I ended up in a role in campus recruiting, early talent acquisition. I loved that. I loved working with early talent. I loved the concept of incorporating them into the workforce, giving them the tools and the resources to be really successful and fast track their careers. And just working with young people who are excited about being in the workforce, who aren't tainted yet, who are drinking the Kool-Aid. So I love that. But then I realized I was no longer in the right organization. I wasn't going to continue to grow there. And then, this is actually a really funny story. My manager got married, went on her honeymoon, came back and resigned without a job because
Wow.
she literally was like, I've had it. I need a new opportunity.
Wow.
And she was the catalyst for me going to a different organization. She was like, so-and-so's wife, does my job at this other company, and they're hiring a brand new team for early talent acquisition. If you're interested, I'll send your resume over. So she did, and that's what gave me the in. So for anyone listening, the first point that I want to make here is that connections matter a great deal.
Yes.
And especially for the first gens listening, because for some reason we have this programming that we have to figure it out and do it all by ourselves, and we have to prove ourselves and work harder than everybody else. No, everybody gets to where they are through some kind of connection and some kind of assistance. So don't be alone in your lane. You really have to put yourself out there and create connections, cultivate relationships, and keep those conversations going. I have to tell you that in my career, in my business, it's all been through connections and opportunities that have come about as a result of that. So I went over to this new organization, and one thing that I learned working on that team in early talent acquisition under a wonderful manager and, this really great program, were the unwritten rules of the workplace and how to navigate all of that and what it really took to fast track your career. And it was now I got it because I've been exposed to it, because this is what we're teaching these fresh out of college graduates,
young kids,
who 2 years in get promoted really quickly. So it's it's all about mentoring and, access to people in positions of power and authority. It's all about how they communicate their personal brands, and how they understand company culture and learn how to navigate that culture. And so learning those tools in the next organization, I absorbed all that and I applied it right away. And I had to really fast track the first few years of my career. I started at another entry level. It was a lateral move that I made at the time with the intention of growing quickly. 8 months in, I got promoted. It was a 2-level promotion. 2 years after that, I got promoted again. And at that time, I was managing the leadership development programs for the finance organization. I loved that. And then, of course, my very ambitious overachiever first gen self thought, okay, now that I've gotten to the quote unquote pinnacle of my HR career. I love what I do. Let me finally launch this business that I've wanted to for a long time. Because if we take a step back, when I was in my 20s, kind of feeling stuck and lost and not knowing what to do in nonprofit and what career move to make, I had started hosting workshops in like my living room for my friends.
Nice.
And you'll appreciate this. A lot of it were mindfulness related. It felt like life coaching in a lot of ways. And this was before the
Mm-hmm.
big like coaching boom, right? I launched Propel on Purpose Coaching, which is my full-time business now. And at the time, I launched it with the intention of empowering other first-gen professionals to learn how to navigate their career or to find careers that filled them with the same sense of meaning and joy that I was feeling. So I never really had, not initially, the intention to pivot full time. It was a side gig for me, and it was another way of making an impact and impacting, people like us. And I thought, if I can get to this point of my career where I love what I do, I can help other people find that too. So it
Yeah.
wasn't meant to be a full-time thing. But then, the pandemic happened, a lot of changes in the organization.
The
And then
world changed.
the world changed. I wasn't able to execute on the ideas and, have the level of impact that I really wanted to have with those programs. And
Mm-hmm.
then I think I just got tired. I got tired of like advocating for myself all the time, proving myself over and over again. And I was, a highly rated employee throughout my tenure. Um, had access to a lot of external leadership development programs and internal things, and I got to do public speaking at the organization and MC an event here and do this other workshop there. I had a lot of access and opportunity, and I don't take it for granted, but at the same time I looked around the organization and thought, I'm such a like quote unquote highly decorated, high performing, high potential employee. Why is it so hard to get to the next level? And it tends to
Right.
be that way. Like there's less of the director level roles, there's less of the VP roles. So it does get harder, but I also saw other people who weren't as like highly decorated, who didn't have access to, who didn't
And
go
we're
through these
still
leadership.
going up the ladder.
Right, exactly. And that gets really frustrating after a
Mm.
while. Um, and just from a compensation perspective, I felt like I was underpaid, considering all of the responsibility that I
What you
had.
were
And
doing.
yeah, luckily I had a really great manager, white man who advocated for me tremendously. He was probably one of the biggest champions of my entire career. And I purposely highlight the fact that he's a white man because I think we also can get in our heads and think, oh, there's no representation. People don't look like me. And so I'm not going to be able to grow. But it's so important for you to have allies and to
Mm.
create really deep connections with your manager and your leaders so that they also can understand. And I'm not suggesting that we're supposed to educate other people, but I think it is beneficial to bridge those
Yes,
gaps of not understanding each other's worlds. And I had very
absolutely.
open conversations with him, like, hey, like here's what I'm experiencing, and this is why this is frustrating. And he understood that as my leader, it was his responsibility to serve as my advocate and my champion. And he took that on and he did that. So lo and behold, in 2021, he left the organization for another opportunity, and the director role was available. I went for it, went through the process. I ultimately got the role, but it just felt
Amazing.
like, yeah, yes and no. It felt like
Okay.
amazing. It felt amazing. And then it got to a point where it has taken so much to get here, and even what this looks like isn't ideal. It just
Mm.
feels like burnout is around the corner, so it's time to leave. And so 2022 was the first year, so that happened at the end of 2021. 2022 was the first year that I managed Propel on Purpose full time, and still doing career coaching and career management coaching. I started to do more HR consulting, a lot of different workshops and keynotes at colleges and universities around identity, belonging, first gen. And then at the end of the year, I took stock of all of that and I realized being a career coach doesn't feel in alignment with my purpose and the mission of Propel on Purpose as it used to, because I'm no longer in that environment. So I don't
Right.
have the same level of belief, if you will, as I used to. And, uh, I realize I can give someone all of the tools and the resources to be successful, but if they're functioning in an organization that isn't set up for them to be successful, or giving them opportunities to grow and develop, then it's not going to matter.
It only goes
And
so far.
exactly. And as Latinas, we're still significantly underpaid. We're the lowest
Yep.
paid out of all women. And so it just feels like there's a different way that I can make an impact that is more aligned with purpose and the
Mm.
mission of Propel on Purpose. And I started working with a small business that is Latina owned, and they gave me life. Like I've been able to help them tremendously with, their people processes, their leadership. But in working with them through that process, it made me realize how much I enjoy working with small business owners, especially Latina owned, Hispanic owned businesses, because you're my people. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
There's the culture, there's the nuance, all of the pressure and the things that we have to navigate because of our families and our stories. And now I understand what it's like to be a full-time small business owner, and all of, the risk and responsibility that comes along with it, along with all of the perks, of course. But I pivoted in 2023. So the focus of Propel on Purpose is HR consulting, leadership coaching. I'm certified in emotional intelligence, and so I can do an EQ assessment, and from there create a development plan for the leaders of my main focus is small businesses, but I can also, of course, do it for professionals in a corporate setting, since I have that background, and I do have a corporate client now. Um, and I feel reinvigorated with this pivot, because it just feels more aligned. If I can help a small business owner grow as a leader, then they can hire more people like us and onboard and train them so they can be highly successful, and they can create these high performing inclusive teams. And that creates the ripple effect that I'm really looking to create in our world.
Absolutely amazing. Oh my goodness. That was like running the race, and we finally got to the end, and I am here like cheering you on because you
Oh,
have
thank you.
such a phenomenal journey of everything you've been through. And we have similar upbringings as far as, again, inner city and EOF, and not having growing up with a lot of resources, being English as a second language, all of those things. But then your route goes corporate. And I want to go back even before you get into corporate. So many people either realize because they connect with it, especially if they have a similar journey, or they may not realize of how much it takes from you. And maybe even we don't realize while we're going through it. And it's just only looking back in reflection that we can honestly say, wow, like our
Mhm.
families came here not knowing the language, not knowing where they were going, not knowing what they were going to do. And then here we are, we have to go to school, perhaps not knowing the language, not having a lot of resources, not having a lot of connections, and having to do it for ourselves. And the amount of self-awareness, of perseverance, of resilience that takes in
Mhm.
order to keep on going, where sometimes you get shot down and you may not even realize it, or when you do, that's such even a bigger wake-up call, and still having to keep going, not because, of course, your family's rooting you on and they have big expectations for you, but you also want to do things for yourself because your family has done so much to even get
Mhm.
here. And that journey, I mean, it is a first gen journey, but so many other folks may experience similar things like that. But it's not only of, being growing up in inner city or being an EOF student, that carries out throughout our entire
Mhm.
journeys in life, and continues to show up, which we see in your story, because you not only had one career and stuck through it and then retired, and like here you are just like doing a brand new thing at the age of 70. Like you're really, really young, have had all of these experiences. Sometimes when things went left, you had to go right, and you created the
Mhm.
spaces for yourself. And then finally are at the point where you have your own business, pivoted there as well, and still reach success even through overcoming hurdles. And I just want to give you like major kudos, but also have our listeners understand that that doesn't always come easy when you can't pick up the phone call and say, oh, can you hook my kid up with the job? Because there's
Mhm.
nobody to do that. We have to create those spaces for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And you know, it's it's something that is it seems like it was easier as I'm talking through it than going through it, right? There were so many moments where I felt like a failure, where I didn't know what the hell I was doing. There's times where I still don't think that I know what I'm doing, and I'm just figuring it out as I go, if I'm being honest. And there's a lot of pressure that I think we feel. Some of that is the pressure of, like you said, making the sacrifices worthwhile, making people proud. And then I think the majority of it comes from the pressure we put on ourselves. I think that our parents and whoever made sacrifices for us, they just want us to be happy. They want us to, have that next generation have the better, life than they had. And we internalize that very deeply, and we think that it means making a certain amount of money, having a certain career, having a certain title, having a certain letters after your name. And honestly, in the pandemic was a time where I had to take a step back and reflect on, if I strip all of this away, what am I left with? Because I am the epitome of a box checker and overachiever doing the most, right? And I have
Same.
always been that way, like in high school and college, the extracurriculars. And the problem with that, and this is why I so much appreciate the work that you do, that you are so busy doing that you're not taking a pause to reflect and really finding alignment and even thinking about purpose. Like, I didn't start thinking about purpose too much later, a couple of years ago, honestly, when I created this business. And it wasn't even the name of it. The initial name was Move the Needle Career Coaching, because my partner has Moved the Needle, and it's like an incubator for entrepreneurs. And so we're thinking, okay, well, you can do the entrepreneur thing and I'll do it like on the career space. And it was supposed to be like our thing. And then I realized I kept saying like propel to purpose, and reflecting on that, I was like, well, purpose isn't a destination. It's actually what should be embedded throughout the process. And there's no point in having all of this momentum and doing all of these things if they're not aligned with intention, if you're not clear on what is the intention, not just the outcome. And I think when you are an overachiever and you think that you have to do all of these things and check all of these boxes to have that achievement, it's very easy for you to lose sight of anything but the outcome. Like, you're just thinking about the outcome, but really life is all about the journey and the process. And if you're not enjoying that process and that journey, you might get to the top of that mountain. And this is the analogy that I love to use, and realize, I don't even like hikes. I don't like mountains. Why am I here? I'm a beach
I spent my whole life hiking.
Right. In the cold, like, I want to be on the beach. This is not the scenery for me. What have I done? And then I worked with a lot of people when I was focused on career coaching that very similarly, they didn't have the opportunity or the privilege to stop and reflect on the why, and they checked the boxes and they got the degrees, and now they're 10, 15, 20 years in a career path that they absolutely hate. They're in the monotony. They have the Sunday scaries and the Monday blues, and they complain all the time, and they bring that home. And that's just not the life, right? What's the point of having the big paycheck and the big title if at the end of the day you're not happy most of the time? Like, that's not it, right? And I didn't realize until working with folks how you can get stuck in that, and then it feels really scary to make a transition.
Right,
However,
when you're so deep into it.
Yeah, you're so deep into it, and then you have a mortgage, and then you have kids, and other responsibilities. You feel like you can't. And so my encouragement for anyone listening is that if you can resonate with any of that and you find yourself stuck, the way in which you propel on purpose is by taking a step back and reflecting on the why, and thinking of what is the life that you want to lead, and believing that you can have that life. It's not a pipe dream. It is very much possible. That's not to say that it's not a lot of work, but you have to, it's a trade-off. Like, do you want to continue down this path where you're not truly happy, or have to do some work, but ultimately get to a place where you are creating a life by design,
I
a
love
life that
that.
you want.
Yes. And you said it so perfectly. Like we get so busy doing instead of really being present and living. And that's something that, at least I feel like for both of us, for you and I, when we created our businesses during the time around the pandemic, or beforehand, but then the pandemic really put it into clear focus as far as what is it that we're doing here? What is it that I
Mm-hmm.
want my life to be like? And let us be a little bit more intentional with that.
Yes.
And our stories speak to that a little bit as far as where we came from. But then getting to that point, there is a lot of self awareness that it takes to have that outlook to be able to reflect back and then think, wait a second, where am I? What do I want my life to be? Am I just going to go through the everyday groundhog day, through that monotony and, feel like where is it that I'm going in life? Or am I going to live with intention and on purpose? And that's where the concept of course, mindfulness comes in, but also a lot of the work that you do with emotional intelligence comes in. And there's a huge overlap when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
both of those concepts that can help people not only when they're, doing a transition in life or in their professional life and personal life, but all the way across the board. So I'd like for you to take a moment and give us the basic explanation of what emotional intelligence is, and then we'll both talk about how that intersects with mindfulness.
Love it. Absolutely. So I am obsessed with EQ. It's newer to me. I just got certified in emotional intelligence, the assessment, the EQI 2.0 in January. That's not to say that I haven't been aware of it and haven't used it in the past, but I'm officially certified and I'm obsessed with the assessment because it is so clear once you take it and then you see the results. It's just so clear of where your strengths are and where are your areas of opportunity, and that how that shows up in your leadership. So the first thing I want to say is that emotional intelligence isn't like IQ. It's not fixed. It really is just these social skills, and it's all about how aware you are of your emotions. And emotions are simply data. These are biochemical reactions that are happening in your body, and we attach meaning to it. And most of the time we're attaching meaning to it through the programming that we've had, through the way in which we were raised in our particular families and our culture. That's why I'm so obsessed with it, because I nerd out. Like, this is what I studied in undergrad, behavioral science. So I clearly see the connections, right? Like, you are an individual and you have your personality, and then you have all of this data that is happening in your body, and you attach meaning to it based on the environments that you have been programmed in. And so what EQ makes you aware of is, well, what are the stories that you're attaching to this emotional data? How do you manage that data? And how does that data impact how you manage relationships and how you lead and how you make decisions and how you manage stressful situations? And it's just incredible, the correlation. And, I talk to business owners who say, well, oh, this person is too emotion based, or like, and you've all heard the saying too. It's like, oh, leave the personal at the door. And it's just not possible. It's not true. We can't separate ourselves like that. And if you're working in environments where you have to do that, that's not the right place to be in, because it's just not possible, right? We are a full human having this human experience. And regardless of what environment you're in, the personal is going to come with you. The way that you feel and the way that you behave in these environments is where you have an opportunity to manage that more effectively. And so what the assessment does is that, and it is a point in time assessment, which is great, because it means that you can take it at a different time after you've worked on a couple of areas and see progress, which is also really motivating, as opposed to something that is fixed. So it's not fixed, it's something that we can work on, because intelligence and our brains are all malleable, right? And
Mhm.
through tools like mindfulness, we can work on things like self-awareness. So there's 5 competencies to emotional intelligence. The first one is self-awareness, self-expression, decision making, relationships, and stress management. And all of within those 5, there's 3 additional subcategories, and it all correlates with leadership. There's a high correlation, and statistically, EQ is responsible for 58% of performance in all job types.
Wow.
And 90% of high performers have high EQ. So there's a clear correlation between having high emotional intelligence and being a high performer. So the more you are aware of your emotions and how to manage that data, the better you are at leading other people, which makes sense.
Course. And I want to point out because I work with children, that this isn't something that we just pick up when we get into corporate or into, real life, into job life, that this is something that we start building in our kids from when they're little. And it overlaps with social emotional learning, which has very similar 5 pillars that the EQ has. So social emotional learning has self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. And that so
Wow.
overlaps with
Mm-hmm.
everything that we want in our leaders and in being effective people in the workplace. But it's more than that. It's being effective people in life, right? Like really
Mm-hmm.
being able to live a good life, to not only be fulfilled for yourself, but to have also that social awareness, to have great relationships, and to get to a place where we are really happy with who we are and who we're around and what we're doing. And that speaks
Mm-hmm.
to, how your journey has gotten to where it is now, and also the work that you're doing now with people in the workforce working on emotional intelligence, which is amazing.
Yeah. I love it.
So
I
that
love the overlap. That's incredible. And the fact that you're helping parents become aware of this and helping children raise their awareness of this earlier on means that you are having a direct impact in how they're going to grow to be emotionally intelligent beings much earlier in life, which is the goal, right? Like we want to be able to empower the next generation to be better off than we are.
Yes, that's always the goal, which is why it's so important that our educators and our schools really have SEL, social emotional learning, at the forefront of their teaching. Because if we are not okay, if our kids are not okay, then what really are they learning? Are we just having them memorize what's in the textbook to take a
Yeah.
test? Or do we really want them to be people, good
Mm,
people? And the
yeah.
intersection between all of this and mindfulness is that when you're able to take a breath, when you're able to pause, when you're able to engage in self reflection, when you're able to respond instead of overreact, then you can really weave through these pillars and think of, well, how am I showing up in the world? And how are my actions playing off of other people? And how are my actions really making an impact on the decisions that I'm making? And is that really feeding me? And everything, they're so closely intertwined that I hope that people really can engage in more mindful behavior. And I always say that doesn't mean like sitting crisscross applesauce and oming until you fly away, but that means just being more present in the space that
Mhm.
you're in, being more intentional with your actions, allowing the space of judgment to leave you not only toward other people, but more importantly towards yourself, because we judge
Mm.
ourselves a ton,
Oh
and
yeah.
just being more kind and more curious toward ourselves and towards the world that we live in while in the very short space that we're here. So I hope that people are able to gain something out of this conversation and then do more or hire you or me or both when it comes to talking about emotional intelligence and mindfulness, social emotional learning for kids, and how that is so, so very important for all of us.
Yes, it's so powerful. So powerful because we're constantly on this like hamster wheel. We're going, busy, doing, and it's so important to pause and just breathe. I can't
Yeah.
tell you the amount of clients, and I start all of my coaching sessions with breath work because I know that they're coming into this space after a long day or putting out fires or, still having to deal with things afterwards. And I'm like, oh, and I've had clients come into the virtual space like, well, let me tell you, let's pause right here and let's just take a couple of breaths. And immediately the way their
Yes.
bodies just relax. I mean, it's scientifically proven. When you
Hmm.
just breath work lowers the cortisol levels in your brain, which causes, stress causes your cortisol levels to spike. And I have had clients who literally just having a few moments of that breath, they'll cry because they've been holding so much in, all of
And
the
not even
pressure,
realizing it.
not even realizing it, and they haven't had the space or the opportunity to just pause and breathe
Yeah.
and let it out, like process all of that. Mindfulness is so important, and just taking a breath and pausing is the first step. And then embodiment. We talk a lot about mindset, and it's super important, and I think that that's foundational. And then you have to move these emotions, this emotional data, in order to process it differently and use it in a better way. You have to move it out of your body, and that can mean crying so that it's literally the negative energy is like being released. It can mean movement so that you're again releasing that like energetic, think about, I have a dog that I'm obsessed with, and I know you have Ollie.
Yep.
And you know how dogs, like, they shake it off. You literally sometimes have to
Literally.
shake it
Yeah.
off in order to process all this. So, it's so empowering to be able to just take a pause, take a breath, and it can literally change your perspective of something from one moment to the next.
So true. I absolutely love it. And with that being said, what is your favorite way that you take care of yourself or that you engage in self-care, not only physically, but also for your mental health?
Ooh, I love this question. Journaling has always been my go-to. I've always kept a journal, and that has transformed that process. I think as a kid, it was journaling, the things that were happening during like my emo phase. It was like
Mhm.
journaling all of like the negative stuff, right? Because I just needed to get it out of my head. And I am someone who tends to overthink and more analytical. So, in order to get out of my head and into my body and intuition, which is doesn't come very natural to me, to be honest, I have to get the thoughts out. So, journaling is incredibly powerful for me. And I've also included in that process gratitude journaling. So starting off the day with what am I grateful for? Because gratitude and fear can't coexist.
Mhm.
Let me say that again. Gratitude and fear can't coexist. And so if you have these fears, am I going to be successful in my business? Can I make this pivot? Can I change jobs? Can I start a family? The things that we can't control, there's a lot of fear around them. If you're grateful for where you are, that starts to dissipate. And
Absolutely.
then you have more clarity as to how. It's hard to get to the how if you don't start with the why.
Mhm.
And if you don't get rid of all of the stuff, the stories and the emotions and all of that. And for
Yeah.
me, gratitude journaling is incredibly empowering, and then just journaling in general.
I love that. And for those listeners who have children in their lives, again, this isn't only things that we recommend for adults. And it's not even coming from our recommendation of things that we think are cool and helpful just because we engage in it, because I also engage in the same as well. But it is scientifically proven for children and adults alike that if you have a gratitude practice, that is an active mindfulness practice, then you can't engage in it, like you said, in so much fear, and the worries can dissipate, and the sadness, when you think about the sadness of the past or the worries about the future, their lessons decrease because of your ability to be present in this moment and having gratitude for what you're experiencing in the right here and right now. That is so very powerful, and I'm so glad that you engage in it and that you are passing this information forward as well.
Oh yeah, I make
And
my clients do it.
I love it because everybody could totally use it and benefit from it.
Mhm.
And I wanted to ask you, because you have such an amazing journey, and I know that it's not over, right? It doesn't stop here. Who knows what the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years are going to bring? So, if you could be remembered for one thing in your life, what would that one thing be?
Hmm. That's a deep one. What comes to mind right now is what I think is my superpower, which is to serve as a catalyst for courage. When I reflect on my journey, even when it hasn't been easy, to what you said earlier, I'm gritty. I figure it out. I'm solution oriented. Sure, I'll be in my feelings for a little bit, and then I'm like, okay, how do we fix this? How do we move forward? And I've taken leaps and I've tried different business ideas and I've pivoted here and I've tried different career paths. And it wasn't until a really dear friend of mine, we had like the sweetest moment after she went to a workshop related to courage, where they asked, reflect on someone in your life who reminds you to be courageous because they embody that. And she was like, I thought of you because I find that you're always putting yourself out there, and that's incredibly courageous. And you're also totally fine with being vulnerable about it. Like, you don't pretend like it's easy, or like there isn't, this other stuff happening. And I was like, oh my God, that's beautiful. I didn't even think of myself. I didn't see myself through that lens. And sometimes, we have the opportunity to see ourselves through the lens of the people who love us and are probably kinder to us than we are to ourselves, because we're self-critical, right?
Yep.
And I hold myself to the highest standard, and I'm always like trying to be better. And so when she said that to me, I was like, you know what? You're right. I feel that. And I want to live that life of courage, of doing the scary thing and making decisions from that place of courage and not from a place of fear. That's not to say that it still doesn't happen and that those things don't creep in, but I want that to be my impact in the world, to serve as an example of courage so that other people feel empowered to do the same. Because I think we're always looking for role models and inspiration and motivation, and if this person can do it, I can do it too. And it's not a comparison thing, it's just purely inspirational. Like, if you can see someone else who has a very similar journey, has had same experiences, then and they make it to a certain point, you feel like if they can do it, I can do it too. They open up that opportunity, that path for you. And that's what I want to serve as that catalyst for courage.
Beautifully said. And you are definitely on your way there to leaving that legacy, because every time I have a conversation with you, I get that. And I'm like, oh, you did what? You've been where? Like, your plans are what? And I just can't wait to see everything else that is to come, because you're truly such an inspiration, not only to me, but I know to so many listeners that are going to be
thank you so
tuning
much.
into this podcast. My pleasure. So you show up in so many ways, definitely in a brave and courageous way. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to first share any closing thoughts with the listeners, and also share where can they find you, because I know that they're going to want to get more of these gems that you share.
Yes. So to the point of courage, ready is BS. So if there's something in your heart, in your soul, if there's a calling, I like to say that life has a way of either pushing you or pulling you towards your purpose. So sometimes you'll be pushed out of a certain situation. It might feel like, oh no, why is this happening? Why is this disrupting my life? Believe that it's happening for you, not to you. And you might not feel ready, and that's the push that you need. And there's no such thing as ready. You just have to figure it out. So process it and figure out how to create the life that you have imagined for yourself, and continue to propel on purpose. And so you can find Propel on Purpose through my website, so propelonpurpose.com. Follow me on Instagram at Propel on Purpose. You can follow me on LinkedIn through my name. And I also have a podcast with a dear friend. It's called The Diary of the First Gen Journey, where we talk about the first gen experience. So tune into that, and more to come as I continue to navigate this pivot and empower small business owners, especially Hispanic and Latina owned small businesses. So if you are a small business owner and you're in need of HR consultant relating to people and processes and improving your team's performance, therefore your company's performance, definitely reach out to me. If you are a small business owner who is ready to invest in your leadership growth, we can do your EQ assessment. If you want to do coaching, we can do your EQ assessment and then build a development plan and have a series of coaching sessions. And if you are either in higher education or working at a big company, I can do workshops and keynotes for those audiences as well.
So awesome. And I know that people are going to be taking advantage because there's a plethora of services that you can provide, and they're all so beneficial. So Anyelis, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me today and for being vulnerable, for sharing your story, for giving us a little look inside and a look onto the future as you continue to just do amazing things. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Of course, thank you. This was amazing. I loved our conversation. I love that you have created this space for people. So thank you, and kudos to you and everything that you're doing.
Thank you. And for our listeners, for our guided meditation today, I ask for you right after you finish listening to this podcast that you just take a quiet moment and reflect on everything you heard. Reflect on the story, on the messages. Think about what is the number one thing that stands out to you the most, and what's one action item that you can take after listening to this podcast and after the reflection. What is one action item that you can take to be where you want to be in life? And with that, as always, in a world where you are free to be anything that you want to be, you are always free to be mindful. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. It would mean a ton if you took this moment to review the Free to Be Mindful podcast on the platform you catch your favorite shows. That quick and easy act lets me know what you enjoy, and it helps others find the podcast too. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you can listen along next week. In the meantime, I welcome you to catch me on social media at Counselor V de Jesus. And as always, remember, in a world where you are free to be anything that you want to be, you are always free to be mindful. Catch you next week.